I watched every single World Cup game that Diego Maradona ever played. Every game. Not highlights, not just the goals, I'm talking the full 90 minutes. Right? And I learned a lot. Sure, we know about the hand of God. But what about the fact that his left boot was actually a size bigger than his right foot? Or what about how he got his teammate a Rolex before the tournament started? Or how he might have set up the 1990 World Cup final loss to Germany with his boot by accident? Nobody talks about these things until today. So we've got to start right at the beginning, 1982. So let's take it back. So 1982, obviously the world was a different place back then. The Falklands War between England and Argentina had took place. Rocky 3 and E.T. came out. Michael Jackson released Thriller and Prince released 1999. Bear in mind, my name means Prince, just saying. And Prince had a son called Amir. Just saying. But for us football lovers, it was the World Cup in Spain. Granted, I wasn't alive back then. And for a certain Diego Maradona, it would be his first entry into European football. Now, what do I mean by that? At that point, he only had played for Argentina, and he'd only played for Argentina's juniors and Boca Juniors. Back then, you couldn't live stream football matches like you could now. So back then, the European audience didn't know much about him. They might have seen some newspaper clippings about him, but they'd never actually seen him in Europe. So this is the first time a European market or the European audience could see him. So the World Cup was held in Spain, and the first game was at the Nou Camp. This was significant because 8 days before, Maradona had signed for Barcelona for a world record fee. A world record fee of £5 million back then. By the way, Maradona was the only player in football history to break the transfer fee record twice. Once to Barca and when he went to Napoli. So in the group stage, he played Belgium, Hungary and El Salvador. And there's a few things that I noticed straight away. For one, the boots he wore. He was wearing the Puma Toreros that had this really weird lacing system that went all the way up to his ankle, which, to be honest, I've never seen those before. It's very different to the modern boots with the high cut collar. So talking about the first game, Belgium, they sat deep.
No cap on God, bro.
Also, they never pressed the ball, so you could see Argentina just playing forward from the back. There was no crazy patterns of play. It was literally goalkeeper passed the ball to defender, and defender would pass the ball straight into the attack or midfield. So you could see there's a lot more attacks back then because the ball wasn't staying in the defensive third for hours, playing centre half, back to the other centre half, playing back to the goalkeeper. Straight away, keeper, defender, midfielder, attack, boom. And that's the first time we would see Maradona getting kicked on the World Cup stage. Belgium kicked him over and over and over again. Also, players didn't spend 20 hours on the floor. Like there were no Neymar Juniors at this point. People would just get up. Because back then there was no VAR. And referees would just let it go if you got kicked. So there was no point in you staying around to try and trick around. But yeah, in the first game we didn't really see much. Belgium won 1-0. Then the next game was against Hungary. Now this game was a bit different. Hungary played a bit higher up, a bit more of a higher defensive line, trying to catch people offside. A bit more modern, if you will. And there's a lot more space. And we really saw Maradona ball out. He scored his first 2 World Cup goals in that game. He also played against El Salvador in the last group stage game. So what really stood out for me was a few things in this particular game. Mario Kempes, who was the hero from the last World Cup, leading Argentina to victory. You saw him dropping, drifting to pockets, driving with the ball. Also, for me, who also stood out was Ozzy Ardiles. Ozzy Ardiles had been getting booed the whole tournament. That's because he's an Argentinian player that played in England at the time. He was playing for Tottenham. So he was in this really weird grey area where he was Argentinian, but he was playing in England. And also he had lost his cousin who was a pilot during the war. Also, Ozzy really stood out in midfield, getting the ball, driving forward, trying to play combinations. So after the group stage, football back then was a little bit different. You also had a mini... You know how nowadays in football, after the group stage, you go straight to the knockouts. Back then you had a second round robin. So Argentina had to play Italy and Brazil. The Argentina-Italy game was crazy. Maradona was marked by Gentile. Gentile went out and caused mayhem. He fouled Maradona 23 times. 23 times. A World Cup record. For context, the average Premier League team commits 11 fouls in the 90-minute game. Maradona got 23 in one game by one player. He then dropped the coldest line ever. Football doesn't belong to the ballerinas. Italy won 2-0. There was a player called Conti stood out for me then, who was dribbling past everyone, and Pele actually mentioned him as one of the most impressive players in the tournament.
2 goals against Hungary reaffirmed Maradona's talent and brought Argentina to the second phase. While the Belgians had stifled Maradona with numbers, the Italians marked him with a one-man crowd called Gentile. Gentile's the sort of guy who tries to swap shirts during a match. There are flashes of invention. But wherever Maradona turns, he finds Gentile at his shoulder, at his ankles, at his knees. With little protection from the referee, Maradona becomes a human pinball, while the executioner, playing the innocent, simply has his wrist slapped.
Then the next game was Brazil. This is the 1982 Brazil team, which is seen as one of the best ever teams to never win a World Cup. They had Zico, Socrates, and they were playing some champagne football. I'm talking just straight out attack, just 3-4 passes and then straight in the final third. They were balling out, and Zico himself was really sick in that game. Now, what was interesting for me is Diego, earlier in the tournament, he had been quite quiet. He hadn't really reacted when he got kicked. He was quite respectful. In the Brazil game, things would change. Brazil were dominating, they were winning comfortably. Diego should have had a clear penalty after being kicked in the box. And then he lashed out. And that was the end of his World Cup. But like I said, that's the first time I think you see Maradona switch. He goes from that innocent young player who doesn't really argue with referees until you see the Italy and Brazil game where he finally lashes out and ends up getting a red card in that Brazil game. But that first World Cup will be quite pivotal into what happens in the next World Cup, the 1986 World Cup. And if you want to know about my thoughts on that, stay tuned for the next video.